Hi, everyone. Welcome to Red Licorice Reviews. I'm Val. I'm here with Alan, and today we are having a conversation about Macbeth and some different versions of Macbeth that we've been watching lately. So I don't know if you want to talk about how this all started, Alan.
We're big fans of the Utah Shakespeare Festival. In fact, that's where we got engaged. And so we love going to plays there. We're very excited this year. They're doing Macbeth as one of their plays. And particularly, we're really excited because I'm not sure how to say his last name, Walter Kimmick. Um, we saw him last year in Much Ado About Nothing playing Benedict, and he just blew us away. He was so good. He was so funny. Really, really amazing actor. And so when we saw he was cast as the lead in Macbeth, made us extra excited for this year's season. So we started kind of diving in deep. We've been reading books about Macbeth. We've been watching multiple versions of Macbeth and just trying to learn as much as we can in preparation.
Yeah, he was so funny in Much Ado About Nothing that it's really hard for me to imagine him as Macbeth.
Yeah.
All
He
right, well,
played, he
let's
played great. He was, yeah. I mean, yeah, I guess there's some arrogance in the role. I guess that'll carry through in Macbeth, but he just played it so well. And, when he was hiding in the tree and walking around with a bucket on his foot and, yeah,
so likable though and endearing.
yes,
And
this
I
will be very different.
I think it will be very different. Yeah, I'm sure he'll rock it.
Yeah.
Okay, the 2010 BBC made for TV movie. Patrick Stewart stars as Macbeth, with Kate Fleetwood, who I don't think I had ever been familiar with before, and now I'm a forever fan.
Yes, she was fantastic. And of course, Patrick Stewart, I grew up on Star Trek: The Next Generation, and he's one of my favorite actors. So when you had suggested watching this one, it's like, yes, let's do it.
Let's look. I think I have a couple of screenshots. Something that really stood out in this adaptation was the setting.
Yes.
The setting was sinister. It was creepy. You can see in the bottom corner, on the right-hand corner, there's a lot of there's some hospital scenes. The three witches are nurses in this version.
With
There,
the quotation marks and
yeah.
nurses.
But the setting contributes a lot to this adaptation in
Mhm.
ways that some of the other versions, like we're used to seeing Shakespeare at the Utah Shakespeare Festival performed in very minimalist ways,
Mhm.
effectively, delightfully. And this, just the setting had a profound impact on the production as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah, the opening scenes were bloody and dark. I mean, this is set, you had said in 1960s Eastern Europe, but it gave off a very much like a World War II battlefield kind of feel. These field hospitals with wounded soldiers bleeding out and people, you know, just blood and suffering everywhere. Um, yeah, it was really potent.
Yeah, it was atmospheric in a terrifying way.
Yeah.
And there's an industrial kitchen that we return to a lot. So I have some screenshots here. Um, a lot of scenes take place in that kitchen, which is interesting in so many ways. Kitchens do tend to be, even in 2025, kind of a mundane place where you have a lot of different conversations that have nothing to do with cooking or kitchens or anything like that. Um, and so these screenshots were taken from the scene where everyone finds out King Duncan has been murdered. These are his two sons that you see in the upper left-hand corner, and they're just receiving the news. And one thing that shocked me in this scene was was this realization, that the king's guards are also dead. And Patrick Stewart turns around, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I did that." And I
Right.
was like, "What?"
Yeah, I remember you said that. I didn't even really totally catch the line, and you were like, "What?" And I looked over at you, and then Lady Macbeth goes nuts, knocking stuff off the shelves to distract from what he just said.
Yeah, it
We had
was
to rewind it. It was like, what did they say? Wait, I missed it.
Yeah, it was such a fascinating way to play that scene. And I was like, I don't know how this is gonna go for them. Like, why isn't everyone suspicious of them immediately?
Right.
Because this is coming undone, right? Like in the
Like I
very
said, I told you it reminded me of Noises Off when the whole play is collapsing around everybody and there's chaos backstage and somebody says like, "Oh my God," as they fall down the stairs or something, and then Carol Burnett's on stage and the other actor looks at her and she goes, "Well, what did you say?" And Carol Burnett goes, "Oh my God," and starts knocking down all of the things on the set to distract from what's going on backstage. It was
Yeah,
very much that moment.
exactly that moment where you can tell, like, there's this moment when Kate Fleetwood looks over and her eyes are just on fire. She's so phenomenal. And she was just like, that was not on the plan, which which maybe we'll talk about too, like who's really driving at
Right,
certain points in the story. And that is a moment where you're like, he went off her script.
right.
And so she causes a scene, and everyone's like, "Oh, poor lady," because of course, like Macduff comes in and he's like, "I don't want to tell you, lady. Like, I don't think your constitution can't handle the news
Right.
that I have to give
And he
you."
has no idea.
So this plays into that,
I think we
it
should
was
talk about yeah, sorry. I think we should talk about how this particular version plays who's driving. But I do want to say one more thing about the kitchen that actually just came to me
okay.
because it strikes me that this kitchen is very cold. Like a lot of times, within people's homes, this is filmed, almost entirely within Macbeth's home. And typically within homes, you feel warmth and you feel, hospitality, and they are the hosts in this scene and in most of this play. They're the hosts, and yet it feels very cold, and that actually kind of parallels the kind of hospitality they actually offered to their guests because clearly the king and his entourage show up and the king and his guards are murdered that night. So um, I wonder how intentional that was, or if it's just kind of a byproduct of the feeling they were going for. But
Yeah, I think either way, what you're saying, like they nailed it because the characters are so cold right out of the gates.
Mhm.
We don't get a sense of warmth from Macbeth or his wife. I don't know if you want to talk about Lady Macbeth and the first time we see her.
Yeah. Well, and Macbeth as well. So, in the early part of the play, um, Macbeth is told by the Weird Sisters, which also it's interesting to note. I think this particular adaptation was the one that I was questioning how often they used the nurses, or I'm sorry, the Weird Sisters in the background of scenes. Like, do they often portray them as background characters, like always there, always watching? Um, which this version did, and I don't really remember seeing that be true in the other versions that we've watched as much. Maybe the Scotland PA one, but this one I felt, and so that was an interesting choice too, as well for the Weird Sisters. But when they first tell him, "Hey, you're going to be king one day," he's kind of like, "Huh, that's kind of funny." Like it doesn't seem to really strike him as almost real, even. And then when he becomes what Thane of Cawdor or whatever the title he gets given, and he's like, "Well, this might actually be real." He sort of ponders. He's like, "Well, but then Duncan just said Malcolm's going to be his heir. So, like, how do I kind of position myself to be the next person in line?" It's not portrayed in a way that he's immediately thinking how he's going to become king right this second. But then he writes the letter home. And so the first time you see Lady Macbeth, she's reading the letter from him saying, "Hey, this weird stuff happened to me. And they might be telling the truth. Maybe I'm supposed to be king." She is so intense and dark. And it was like I'm going to be queen and I'm going to make this happen and I'm going to make sure you do what needs to be done to make it happen. So this is very much the first time we see her, she's positioned as she's going to drive this action. Um, and then when they are kind of together and talking about doing it, like, hey, the king's going to be here tonight. And she's basically like, well, yeah, you're going to murder him tonight. He's very hesitant. He kind of bumbles it a little bit. He commits the murder, but then he like brings the knife back with him and she's like, why did you bring the knives? I have to do all the dirty work around here. And she takes the knives back and wipes the blood on the guards' faces and in a very much like she's in control kind of way. Um, and so yeah, that's really how they kind of like he's not smart enough and really gutsy enough to do it, and she's the one who drives him to do it. And I
And
don't
I,
think that's quite as strongly portrayed in the other versions.
yeah, and I took a couple of screenshots of their power couple moments because if I think they're just so telling of a couple of things. The state of their relationship can be seen through these pictures, but also like you're saying, who's driving right now? And I think the hand position really shows that as well. So we've got the very top image is when Duncan is arriving and they're putting out dinner for everyone. And I remember thinking, like, who holds a cake like with one
Right.
hand? And she just so very confidently, like it weighs nothing, holds this cake. And then her hand is atop his.
Well, and look at the expressions on their faces too. He looks a little uncertain because this is her summoning him to dinner because he's like hanging out in the kitchen, like ruminating and like kind of being like, can I go through with this? What is this going on? And she comes and gets him. She's like, hey, your guests are kind of wondering where you're at. You better show your face because otherwise that's going to be really weird. And so she comes and summons him, and yeah, she's taking him out to dinner.
Yeah, she's driving. Like, look at her face.
Hmm.
And it's interesting that like his hand is there, hers is on top,
Hmm.
which is interesting, right? He's not holding her hand.
Right. And not clasped, like it's just
Yeah.
his. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we see in the image below to the left, I don't know if you can tell because there's kind of a grate in front of her, but she's covered in blood. He's
Mhm.
got blood all over him. So this is after the murder.
Right.
And there's a very different grip.
Yeah.
So they enter this power stance, and he's now gripping her hand.
But almost maybe as like a lifeline. Like this again, the way they portrayed this, he came back from the murder kind of all out of sorts and not even really knowing what he was doing. And she was the one who was cleaning up his messes. And so she looks resolute here, like she knows they did the right thing, and he's not so sure.
Yeah. And I know they're kind of in an elevator. And so that is one explanation for their proximity to each other. But I think it's also a way to think about like, this is a moment, maybe the only moment where they're like on the same page, like this thing happened and we both played a part
Yeah, kind of propping each other
because
up a
they're
little
kind
bit.
of distant in the top image. And then in this image where she's in the red dress, everything's red. She
Mhm.
can't stand the side of him anymore. He's now driving, he's making these decisions. She was never on board. She can't even. And so again, we've got distance between them. And like you're saying, their faces show so much.
Right. And to say she's not on board, I think it's good to emphasize what she's not on board with because she wanted to kill the king and become the rulers. But then what he did once he had that power um, went far beyond what she ever intended or thought was going to happen. And he got kind of, he got paranoid, he got drunk with power, and he really did a lot of terrible things, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. And
Yeah. Definitely. But I thought it was such an interesting choice. We didn't see this in any of the other versions, this power couple stance,
right,
and using that power couple stance to tell the story of the relationship, the characterization, even the development of the plot.
right.
So I thought that was a very cool thing. And we have to talk about this scene, which again takes place in the kitchen. I don't know if you want to talk about Patrick Stewart and his sandwich making. That's what's
Yeah.
happening here.
So I remembered, and before I had ever seen this version, I had read his autobiography that came out recently called, I think it was called Make It So. Um, it was something like that. And he talked about this sandwich scene because this movie was made for TV, but it was based on, I believe, a West End run, like with the same actors. And so they were sort of putting their show back on for in a movie sense, but they had put this on in play. And he talked about during rehearsals, he's got this very long monologue where he's talking to these two people who he's telling to go murder Banquo and no, 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 sorry, Macduff's family, right?
I think this is Banquo and
This is
Son.
Banquo, maybe?
This was
Okay.
about,
Banquo
yeah,
and his
this,
son. Okay.
yeah.
I thought that took place outdoors. I can't remember. You're probably right. It's probably Banquo and his son scene. Um,
Either way, it's definitely about murder. He's
yeah.
definitely, these are henchmen.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right about this particular scene. But yeah, he's like, this is a hard scene because I'm just basically monologuing to these two guys, telling them to go murder people. But he's like, it's hard to pace it. It's hard to know what to do with myself while I'm on the scene. So he suggests to the director, he's like, what if I made a sandwich during the scene? He's like, because you're like, I get the bread, I cut the bread, I slab the butter on, I got the slices of ham, I put the ham on, I put the cheese on, I cut the sandwich in half, into pieces, and I give one piece to each of the two guys, and I have a piece. And it was a way to pace the scene for him and to give it some kind of flow and action while he's otherwise just kind of monologuing at these people. And he said it became like famous in theater circles, being, people would call it the famous sandwich scene. And I guess it was, something nobody had ever done before. And, he got kind of famous for doing it. And that, it appeared in this movie. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, this is the sandwich scene he was talking about. I was like hitting you on the couch.
Yeah. It was a brilliant scene. I love the sandwich making, and the henchmen are brilliant in this part. They're simultaneously thrilled to kind of be noticed and asked to by Macbeth himself to do this duty for him. But then when he tells them what it is, they're like pretty disturbed, and
Mhm.
that he's just making a sandwich while he's
Right.
talking about it and then
Right. The
handing it to them. He's
nonchalance.
like, here you
Yeah,
go, eat this. Like it's, and they've like lost their appetite. Like they're
exactly.
like, what is going on? And you can tell he's got a bite out of his sandwich because he's just eating and talking. And
Right.
so it shows so much about who he is as Macbeth, as a character in that moment where his humanity's gone.
Mhm.
He has no feelings.
Right.
So yeah, famous sandwich scene. If you haven't had the pleasure,
It looks like a pretty good
check it out.
sandwich too, as I'm watching him make it. It's good.
Um, so yeah, so we love the Patrick Stewart version. Um, I think each version we watched gave us something different to think about. Um, I think what I was left with from that 2010 Patrick Stewart version was how much Lady Macbeth was kind of a driver. She felt like she was a real driver in the early moments, and how things changed. And also the setting just made the whole thing feel so different, where
Mhm.
it felt like there's this bigger thing happening, and we're seeing a part of it, but it made it like less personal in some ways.
Right. Well,
So
as we talk about the next version too, because I think it's interesting that the beginning of the Patrick Stewart version, we we hear of him, his exploits in battle, that there's the soldier reporting to the king about how, like, Macbeth personally clove the guy in half, the rebellion or whoever the leader of the other people, and how strong he was and how much he led from the front. But we don't see Macbeth participating in any battles in the first one. We hear bombs and explosions, and we don't see him fighting until the end when he's defending against Macduff's attacks, or not Macduff. Well, I guess Macduff's there, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Malcolm and his army's attacks. That's the only time we really see him fighting. In other ways, they've more kind of positioned him as like more modern day general, just ordering the troops and not really necessarily participating actively is kind of how they, he
Yeah,
didn't
it felt
he
very
didn't come away with blood on
political.
his hands from the battle that we saw.
Mhm. Yeah, it felt very political. You could feel the politics of it,
Mhm.
but it didn't feel like he was a soldier fighting with his troops.
And that
And
would kind
that's
of make
something
sense
that changed.
given them, putting it into the 20th century because 20th century commanders aren't leading from the front like they would have historically um, during the time that the real Macbeth lived. So,
Yeah. And so that's why the 2015 version was such an interesting contrast because it is set in what looks like it would have been period setting.
mhm.
We've got Michael Fassbender as Macbeth and Marianne Cotillard as Lady Macbeth, and they are amazing. Let's see, what have I got? So here's some images of them. Kind of the first moments we see them, this is what they look like. He's clearly in his soldiering war leader armor,
Right.
and she's wearing black. Actually, maybe we need to back up to the very, very opening scene.
Yes. Talk about that.
Ooh, I can't believe I just almost forgot about that. So I know that people feel a lot of different ways in general about providing backstory to Shakespeare characters, to Shakespeare productions that were not part of the original plays. So, you know, however you feel is perfect. But in this version, we see that it's a funeral for Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's young child. And so everyone's in black, which makes it feel very funerally for us in 2025 in the Western
Mhm.
Hemisphere, right? That's like code for funeral. I don't know if it was back then, but it's very dark. The village is there and they're completely distraught, as one would be losing a child. And it just helped everything make a little bit more sense out of the gates, why they might be in very dark places emotionally.
Mhm.
Some of her other lines later, like she refers to a child, she refers to nursing, but we never see a child. And so this helped contextualize that like she had been a mother,
Right.
which makes those lines even more profound, I think.
I agree.
So, um, yeah, that's our first moments that we see them before he goes into battle scenes, which is what you expect. Um, you get it humanizes them, right? As parents experiencing loss.
Right.
So that was very different. And then I think the next thing we see after is battle.
Right. And the preparations for battle. Yeah. With
Preparations, yes, and the preparations were significant. So one of the things that I really loved about this version was the picture we get to see of who Macbeth is as a person,
Mhm.
as a soldier, as a leader in these preparations. And so there's a screenshot of he so he has his troops and
Mhm.
like some other troops come up to support their effort.
It was,
And
yeah,
you
the
see,
reinforcements from the king. Yeah.
yeah, that they're like young men. And he looks at them, and the look that he has is just like, I don't feel great about this.
Right.
And then he's prepping everyone by hand, like by hand. He himself is participating in, in their painting themselves and psyching everyone up as much as everyone else is, which says something about his leadership too, and that time period. But here in this moment, you can see this teenager. He's helping to paint his face, and the way that he just kind of grasps him and looks at him, it's like it felt to me like he was trying to bless him, or like the touch meant like, I acknowledge you and I value
Mhm.
you. I wish you weren't here. It was just a very emotional moment. And like, I don't think they spoke.
Right.
So it just made me feel so differently about Macbeth as a human person in this moment, seeing how he cared about people. He didn't know this boy, I don't think.
Right.
They were from another place, but he cares about him. He cares
Mhm.
about his troops. And I put on the left, you can see Banquo. I don't know if you want to talk about Banquo at all or
Yeah, well, I mean,
battle.
again, they show these extensive preparations for the battle. They show again the idea that Macbeth as a war leader at the time would have been in the thick of the battle. Like he would not have just been sitting back. Like he would have been there. That's why so many, generals and so many commanders and even kings died in battle historically because they were there on the battlefield. They were participants, and so he was there, and Banquo was there, and it shows them, it shows them fighting, it shows people dying around them after the battle. Banquo and Macbeth are gathering the dead bodies to basically, I don't bury them or make a funeral pyre or something, but they're going around the battlefield collecting the dead together. There's a guy who's being I can't remember exactly what was being done to him, but he was
So,
wounded,
yeah,
and they're doing
they're caring for
somebody's
his
doing
wounds.
something to him, like a doctor kind of is doing something to him, and Macbeth is holding him down so he's there arm in arm with his soldiers. He's bleeding with them, he's suffering with them, and he and Banquo are sleeping on the ground, the hard ground, cold ground next to each other, whispering at night about just, their lives and their brotherhood and their bond. And this is just something we, in the Patrick Stewart version, we just don't get. Like Banquo and Macbeth kind of show up almost like, I think you mentioned it one time, almost like work friends. You're like, hey, we work together. We're just like we happen to be in the same location and we come across these weird sisters and they're talking to us both. But we don't get that sense that they are true brothers the way that this portrays them, that the bond that they would have had. And I think that's important. And we'll talk about that later, why that was
Yeah.
so important in my
The
viewings.
relationship comes off completely different in this version,
Mhm.
which is devastating, but just brings so much depth, I think, to the
Mhm.
production. This is, I put this in here. This is kind of a weird time to talk about it, but this is the final scene. Macbeth is coming out. He's gonna meet Macduff. This is, the very end. And the whole scene looks like this.
Mhm.
So everything's on fire, everything's burning. Um, you can see that the way that it's shot, it's very cinematic, but Macbeth no longer has features. And there are moments when they're close up, and so you do see his features. But like, I think for me, the way that this is filmed is to show that he's been stripped of humanity. He has no humanity left. And there's nothing but blood and rage left in him. And so
Mhm.
this whole scene looks like this. It's red and it's orange and it's burning.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, oh, I put in slides. So this was really fascinating to me, and I am not sure how other people think about Lady Macbeth, but I thought that the way that she is dressed shows a lot about her journey. I wondered if there was any symbolism there. So here's kind of my hypothesis, and you can jump in and agree or disagree. But on the left-hand corner, that's our very first time we see her. That's the funeral scene. She looks like she's dressed for a funeral. It's black. And in the next scenes, when Macbeth returns home, Duncan pulls up. She's still in black, which would
Mhm.
make sense if she's still in mourning. I don't know if it was also just like a common color that people dressed in back then. I don't know. But it did feel like black is her life before everything goes down.
Mhm.
And once everything goes down, now you can see she gets to dress in the trappings of a queen. Not very long. You can see the wealth, you can see the finery. Her hair is different. And now she's made it, right? She has arrived, but at what cost and at what continued cost?
Right.
So this is kind of her peak moment dressed in finery, or maybe like what she thought would be her peak moment. Like, hey, we finally arrived. We're here, the castle, it's ours.
Right.
I'm a
Well,
queen
this
now.
scene wasn't this scene when Macbeth sees Banquo and he's kind of like losing his mind at dinner and
Yes,
she's having to kind of like cover for him. So
yes.
while she's dressed as if this is the peak and this is what she thought she wanted, already the cracks are starting to
It's
show.
yeah, it's coming apart already. And then the next picture down. So I kind of tried to arc the photos as to illustrate. But when you look at her in this scene, and this is where Macduff's family is getting murdered,
Yeah.
and you look like you can see the coarseness of the fabric. She has no finery. She's not wearing a crown.
Mhm.
She's not wearing jewelry. The fabrics look completely different. And again, we've kind of got this white happening, this off-white. She settled into this color, which she never wore before she was queen, but now she's queen. She wore white. Now she's still wearing white, but things are falling apart and horrible things are happening, things she never intended and she is not happy about, that are profoundly disturbing. Just more and more things continue to happen that are just so disturbing to her until she really can't handle anything anymore. And
Mhm.
in this final image we get to see of her, well, this isn't the final image, but in one of the last moments where we see her live, she has returned to their original home and she's having a hallucination and she's seeing their child and she's having a conversation, which I thought was really interesting because yeah, anyway. And she's wearing even more white. And when we see that original funeral, that young child is dressed in white and they've got kind of a shroud. And to me, her outfit looks like a burial shroud.
Mhm.
To me, like this has just been from queen top moment straight to funeral shroud for herself.
Right.
So I think the colors mean something. I think the fabrics that they choose mean something, and it's telling her story along with everything else.
Well, I think it might be worth mentioning how they, again, who is driving the story at the different parts? How do they portray that? Because while, theoretically the lines are the same in the two movies, they do cut different stuff. Everybody who does Shakespeare nowadays cuts lines. This film even rearranged things a little bit. I don't know how much the first film rearranged some lines, but everybody cuts different lines. But what lines they choose to keep and how they deliver them and in what context they deliver them makes a big difference into how it feels. Because this one, even when the weird sisters told Macbeth he was going to be king, Banquo kind of turns to him and goes like, "Why do you look so disturbed by that when I know that that's what you wanted or that that's what you want?" And so even from then, Banquo kind of is like, "Hey, you've told me a bunch of times that you would probably make a really good king and you probably should become she should be king." So that kind of again puts more of the impetus in his corner. And while she still eggs him on a little bit, it's a little bit more in this. It felt a little bit more to me just like encouragement to just get him over the hump and not the person who's guilting him or driving him to do it so much as in the Patrick Stewart version, which felt like he was her puppet in that moment. This one did not feel that way. He felt much more in control, and she was just kind of a little bit egging, like cheering him on to do it, as
Yeah.
opposed to almost manipulating him to do it.
Yeah, very different feels. I like how you put that, where she kind of feels like the puppet master in the Patrick Stewart one.
Mhm.
And this one, the line hits so differently, where she was like, if I had like a suckling babe, I would punch it in the face. And we know that's not true. We know
Right,
that's not who she is because of how distraught she was with
right.
the death of her child. So it does hit so different when we know, like, you are not yourself. And we know that because you would not talk about that this way if
Right.
you weren't messed up by what happened to you previously, which we do not get in the Patrick Stewart version.
Right. The other thing, it's been a long time before we took this deep dive. I have not seen Macbeth for a very long time. I know I read it in high school. I know I've seen it performed on stage. My memory was always that they kill the king, they both descend into madness because they killed the king, and this whole play was about the guilt they felt from that action that kind of was their downfall. That's my memory of it all. This particular version completely changed my understanding of the play. Um, and again, for right or wrong, and maybe a lot of other people have already come to this conclusion, and I'm just way behind. But this particular one made me think that what caused their descent was not the guilt of really killing the king. I don't know that they felt either one of them felt particularly bad about that. I think that the murder of Banquo is what is Macbeth's undoing because, he sees his ghost and that's when he starts losing his mind. But he murdered his brother, basically, his brother in arms, like stronger than blood brother. Like this is the guy he bled beside and fought beside and was, you know, trusted his life to. And he got so paranoid that he killed him. And I think that's what sent him over the edge. It wasn't the king. I don't think he really particularly thought Duncan was a strong king or a king to be respected or, you know. And then I don't think she was particularly upset about killing the king because, again, for similar reasons. I don't think necessarily think she thought he was a great ruler or whatever. But it was what Macbeth did after he became king, particularly murdering women and children and innocent people. He sent his troops out to the countryside and says, kill anyone who speaks of weakness or fear or something. And then he's burning alive these innocent people and she's watching it happen. And so even though her lines are like out, damn spot, and she's like trying to wash her hands of the blood, and that could be taken literally of like the blood that was on her hands from killing the king. But I think she feels guilty about the action she helped set in motion that led to the deaths of so many innocent people after the fact, and that's the blood that's really on her hands that she feels, whether or not that's true or not, because obviously she wasn't committing those actions, but she feels guilty for helping set that in motion. That's how I felt after watching this movie, and I can't sort of like unsee that now in the play.
I agree wholeheartedly. Um, and I think a fascinating thing that they did that's so tied to that, because she's devastated and there's no coming back from how now she sees him, how she
Mhm.
sees their actions, what she has become or what she feels like she has become because she was party to this, is in that final scene in where she's in the lower right corner and everybody plays this different. Traditionally, she's kind of off by herself, and the doctor and the nurse are also there and they're having a conversation about her, and she's maybe hallucinating and also kind of reliving that first murder.
Mhm.
But in this version, she's having that conversation by herself. She's delivering those lines like, quick, get your bedclothes on. And we know that that was like what she said to Macbeth with
Mhm.
the Duncan murder. But here, she has gone back and she's talking to her child. So for me, that tied that clear back to what her original trauma was, which was the loss of her child.
Mhm.
So it just brought a very different meaning
Right.
to her as a character, what really bothered her, where her limitations were, and where she returned to when she had everything,
Right.
lost everything, and felt lost herself.
Right. Well, they make a big point because in the Patrick Stewart version, Lady Macbeth is not there when Macbeth kills Macduff's family. Like they're in what, like a shower room or something, and he
Yeah, yeah,
shows up
yeah.
with his soldiers and kills them all. Here, he murders them in front of her and kills these children and whatever. And that's, you know, triggering a lot of trauma for her.
Yeah,
Uh, and yeah.
yeah. So I think this absolutely changed the way I think about the characters
Mhm.
and the storyline. I don't know. It will be hard to think about Macbeth any other way after you
We,
see this
we
story.
joked a little bit that this one ruined Macbeth for us because it was so magnificently done and was felt like such a fresh take on Macbeth while still not being like they completely diverted from the source material or anything, but it just was such a fresh take that I don't know, I loved it so much.
Felt very authentic.
Yeah.
The setting felt very authentic without being kind of distracting.
Hmm.
There were so many times in the Patrick Stewart version where I was scratching my head, where I was like, okay, what is happening here? What are they saying? How does that relate to where they are right now? What does all of this mean? And this one just flowed
Hmm.
like a story. But I think, and that's not to say anything negative about the Patrick Stewart version. It's supposed to be disconcerting. It's supposed to be disorienting. It's supposed to be dark and twisted, and it's supposed to not make any sense.
Right.
So I think both directors, both casts knew the assignment
Right.
and did it
Absolutely.
perfectly.
Well, and as a lover of like epic films like Braveheart and Gladiator and those types of movies, this felt right in that genre and felt it held its own among the best of that genre. And just again, just it just blew me away. Yeah.
Yeah, it was phenomenal. Um, there was a Globe production from 2013. And I think I have some images. Let's see. So, this is blurry. It very much felt like a straight reading
Mhm.
of the traditional Shakespeare that we see performed, right? Rather than being like an adaptation, it's not adaptation. It was just like a straight read of everything.
Mhm.
And we still get all of these delicious tidbits. I love that Lady Macbeth is dressed in red out of the gates. So, and she's vicious and ruthless and fantastic. And Macbeth, becomes unhinged. Um, because it's in the Globe, that's a totally different feel. We have that minimalism again. One thing what was super fun about it, and I think is like one of the treats of live theater,
Mhm.
is they brought in some musicians. And so you get kind of this soundtrack along the way. You can't see them, that this is the castle and there's musicians up in the top. Then they had bagpipers which were not period, but
Right.
we must have in 2025 if we're going to enjoy that
Right.
Scottish play. Um, so that was very fun. I love the minimalistic set. Another thing that cracked me up about this version that no other version had was like the hustle and bustle of like castle life or manor life, right?
Mhm.
There's servants everywhere all the time. And they play that in here. So people will be delivering their lines and a servant will walk through and they'll straighten up. And it's sometimes a little bit comical, but it also made it feel more real. It's really hard to have these mastermind villainous discussions in private when there's
Right.
servants all the time. And I think that this version Um, yes, let's talk about the humor. So we know Shakespeare, funny, right? This is not a comedy, but there are still parts, there are still moments when he employs humor and they play that humor. And
Right.
so this is a scene where I think it's Macduff comes knocking at Macbeth's door, right? Duncan's been murdered, but nobody knows it yet.
Mhm.
And there's a doorman, and the doorman is making dirty jokes and he's being ridiculous. And this, which I'm sure was intended, and it was intended to be that way. And that's for, all of these people in the front, that's for their enjoyment, and you can see it. It's very clear what is happening. There's a trapdoor. He comes out of a trapdoor. The trapdoor is fantastic in this production. When the doorman comes out, he's painted like a clown. And this is a blurry image because I like took it
Yeah.
while the movie was playing. I watched it on DVD. Um, but he's got like white paint foundation. He's got rosy cheeks. He's got these painted on eyebrows. They've painted his nose area red. So he's very clownish. And you can tell his clothing is all in disarray. He's a
Mhm.
clown. He's a clown. He's being a clown. He delivers the lines, everyone laughs. It's hilarious. And it was a little bit of a relief to see that humor. We did not see any humor in the other versions we watched. I don't know if you
They
want.
left his whole part out in the Fassbender version, and in the Patrick Stewart version, they uh they played it more sinister. The doorman was like saying the lines, but he was saying them almost more like threats rather than jokes. It was really creepy.
Yeah, it was dark, morbid humor,
Mhm.
not like silly, drunken after a party kind of humor. So it was cool to see this production, and being in the Globe felt like they were really trying to build something that felt true to the original text. And I always appreciate that. Um, I think that is, yeah, that's all I have for the Globe one.
Well, and
And when I
speaking of the Globe
think,
Theater, the Shakespeare Festival has a replica of the Globe Theater on the site of the SUU campus where the festival happens. And so the one that we're going to see this summer is in the replica of the Globe. So it's going to be really fun to, you know, to to s- to see it that way.
yeah, and I'm so curious about how they're going to play all of these things. We've seen so many versions now, we just about have it memorized. What lines do they keep? What lines do they cut? Do they keep humor in? There was no humor in that Fassbender.
No.
Not.
Except when we laughed at the line when he called her Chuck, because we keep laughing about that. We had to look up it's a term of endearment, but like he calls his wife Chuck. And so we had a good time with that for a few days.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So I'm picturing something similar to this Globe version, but I am very excited to see what they do. It's I just
Yeah.
can't guess.
They always do a fantastic job, so it's going to be great whatever they choose.
It's going to be delicious. Yes. Um
Speaking of delicious,
this 2001 version adaptation, reimagining, how should we label
reimagining is a
this?
good word for it, I think. Yeah.
Reimagining is maybe the appropriate word. It's called Scotland, PA, as in Scotland, Pennsylvania. And if you would like to see kind of a 1970s era, do you think 70s?
It felt 70s-ish, like it was set in the 70s.
Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
absurdist with
They
Christopher
definitely
Walken.
don't take it too seriously for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like this was a little bit absurd and it
Mhm.
doesn't take itself too seriously. well, Christopher Walken always like
Yeah,
was
it's
fantastic
hard.
in it.
Even though he's a
He always
fantastic
plays
actor,
it.
it's so hard.
And Maura Tierney was dark and
Yeah.
fantastic in this. And she just gets darker and more intense as it goes
Mhm.
on. So it was for something that seemed like it was just going to be a silly ride.
Yeah.
It was interesting. It was worth it. It was totally worth the ride.
I think we
And
both decided we loved it afterwards.
yes,
It had some moments early on in there where we're kind of like, where is this going? How is this gonna feel at the end? But in the end, we both loved it.
yeah. And I think for something that was so obviously being silly, they took that original text and played it pretty true. There are some differences. There are some differences. There is some, you know, artistic license, but even so, I love the way that they wove in Macduff's sons
Mhm.
and the reasons why they skip town. I thought they did a fantastic job of making that make sense.
I mean, Duncan's
It's
sense
in some ways. Yes, sorry. Duncan's sons. Yes, sorry. Oh my gosh. Yeah, because Macduff, luckily his family
is not around, is not
is
nearby.
uninvolved and
Yeah.
stay alive.
Yeah.
But
I appreciated too that I think this is one of the few times, um, other than maybe people claim that like Lion King is based on Hamlet and stuff, but like this is one of I think the only times I've ever seen somebody adapt a Shakespeare story and not keep the original Shakespeare and feel like they were free to tell the story, but truly just make it set in the time period that they set the piece in. And so that was kind of fun too.
yeah, but still stay so true,
Mhm.
shockingly true for how silly it is
Yeah,
to those original plot, the original themes. So if you are in for something kind of wacky, you should
it's worth it.
absolutely check this one
It's
out.
worth it.
Not kid friendly.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely not.
None of these
But
versions are. Um, so all that to say, I'm thrilled. I feel prepped and primed to go to Utah Shakespeare Festival and see what their director has done with this piece. To see, I mean, we have a fantastic cast here. We have
mhm.
people who are returning to the Shakespeare Festival. We've known them before, we've seen them, we love them. And it's going to be dark and it's going to be ugly, but it will be phenomenal.
I can't wait.
So, everybody listening, please check it out. Go see Utah Shakespeare Festival, Macbeth. Enjoy all of the productions they have this summer and let us know how you felt, what you thought. We can't wait to hear all about it.